All right, so let's run through the profit taking process. So we talked about the way that I do things, and that is that I like to break up my trade in an order of magnitude of parts of 3, right? So we talked about improving our average and how that's generally an essential part of my strategy to get my first scale off quite quickly, to essentially mitigate most of the risk of the trade. And then the second one is going to come off of some sort of momentum, or if the market's cruising, like the example that I'm showing here, it may be where it reaches a certain level of support or resistance, depending on how far away that is and how quickly we get there. And then the third one is going to come off hopefully at the end of a long trend day, or where I've determined that the average daily range for the day and where the final target for that kind of makes sense, right? If we have an ADR of 200 and we get beyond that point, then it may make sense to take price off there, depending on how well the market is trading or trending. So let's run through and see what that looks like. So we're going to look at a trending example first. And so what we've seen here is as the morning opened up outside of the previous day's value here, right, we can see that the market was coming up here. The momentum has shifted to the downside. We had a nice price excursion to the downside, price exploration, tested this point of control here from this day, and began to consolidate in this area here. So we're now consolidating out of value, right, with a sharp move to the downside. And so we're looking at today as where we would typically be looking for a potential reversion to the mean trade, right, after it touches this value here and the potentially comes up here and price rolls over from there. What we see happen is in the beginning of the morning here, price essentially consolidates for 2 full hours. Okay, and so again, when we talk about trading with the momentum, right, wherever that breaks, that's going to be our initial directional bias, should roll with that direction, and then we let the market tell us what it wants to do. So because we had a strong move to the downside, we had some nice volume come in here to push this down lower, and it looks like we had a consolidation is here as well. So this seems to be the consolidation stair-step lower pattern kind of taking hold of the market here. Market continues to consolidate, and then we get a break lower. So at that point, this is our trading time frame. And so if you have a momentum breakout strategy at this point, then this is essentially a valid entry at some point within the breakout of this structure here, right? So let's say that we got in this trade, the market broke to the downside, and so now we're in. You can see that obviously, unless you bought in on this first bar here, pretty low to the bottom, that you are going to take a little bit of heat on the trade, but not much, right? If we're looking at getting in, whether it's a break of these lows here, we should be planning on a profit target, essentially 2 to 3 times the area where we got in at, right? To make sure that our risk reward is skewed, large enough in our favor, and our stop should be generally in the top half or above this consolidation area. And so we can pretty quickly take our first scale within this area, and then we can see here that this is previous chart support from a previous day. Let's see if I can pull that up real quick. So I believe it's from over here, this bar here. And so when we switch back over here, okay, that's something we're going to be looking for the market to have a reaction at, right? So because we have this essentially this move vertically lower, right, and it comes and essentially taps that level, this could be a great area for you to take that second profit, right? Especially when price is moving and trending, you're going to see it test, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to bounce there in a significant way, but if it does, right? And we took our profit there, and it bounces back up to VWAP, developing VWAP, or back up into this section here. That would give us a great area to take another entry, another stab at another attempt lower. And so it allows us to re-add to our position and beef up our profits for the day, right? But price action is showing us in this trade that even though minor support was broken here, we had a little downtrend line that we were able to draw here. And so this is potentially another exit that you could use if you liked using a trend line and you wanted to be consistent with that aspect. Then as price broke up through here, this could be a valid profit taking area, or price action movement as well. But we can see that price is just flowing to the downside, right? So there's just not much fighting of the trend at this point. And so the market is just cruising. So there's your scale off. There's your first scale off for improving our average. There's our second scale off for essentially our momentum exit. And then the third being what we talked about, either waiting for that reversal signal to come through, or the longest trend line for that time frame to be broken in a meaningful way. And so or just at the end of the time frame, at the end of the trading session as well, which is exactly what we got here, right? So price continued to trend lower, it bounced at this level, broke through, we were able to eventually work and digest through that. We didn't quite get a test of this last final support level, but price did stay in a nice downtrend the entire session. So let's say we were day trading this. This is from, essentially the 9:30 time frame through 4 o'clock, and then price essentially just closed out the day flat for a nice trend day lower. And at that point, you would just exit the trade, right? So this is kind of like super ideal scenario, right? So we'll go through another one that's a little bit trickier, and then we'll also go through a swing trading example as well. All right, so this example is going to be a little bit different, a little bit more rough price action, not such a smooth, picture perfect trend, right? But we got to go over the multiple scenarios, right? Because even though the trend days don't happen, they often tend to be the hardest to trade because they only happen just every once in a while, and we can potentially make a lot of money on them, but we trade in expectations for most market scenarios to end up like that, and most of the time they don't, right? So we hit the nice trend. So now let's look at a pullback into a continuation of trend. All right. So what we see here is price essentially came down. This is part of the process of what looks to be a reversion to the mean trade, just going back towards or against the main trend. And so what we see is that price came down, value moved lower, price stalled, and we had a large momentum move to the upside in the opposite direction on the previous day here, and then we ended in consolidation, right? So this is what we end up with. Okay, we have a nice value area that was built throughout the day. We can see the price definitely moved from lower to higher, and so the next morning is going to be is going to be analyzing that price action and then trying to figure out where we're going to go next, right? So after such a long consolidation period, again, it's generally, you've got two options, right? We can trade with the breakout wherever that happens to be, or B, we can also anticipate that momentum will continue, right? So that's what we see here. Price is moving from lower to higher. And so let's take a look and see how price action worked out. So what we see is after the market essentially opened, at this point we're just running with an 8 o'clock open, and so we see price consolidates. It finds support here at this day's value area low and is rejected higher. It is not able to quite meet the value area high, comes back down, and then during the open it tests the value area low again. Okay, and then so we're looking at that as potential as to remain as support, right? If we're gonna anticipate the price moving to the upside and we want to capture profit on the long side, then we want that to hold and remain, right? So that's exactly what happens here. As where price comes down, finds support, consolidates in this area for about a half an hour before it's rejected to the upside. Okay, and so I've got this trend line here drawn because if we talk about waiting for a good low risk entry, right? If price has support at the value area low and the developing value area and all that, then the lowest risk entry for a long trade at that point is as low of a price that we can get within this area, right? Because our stop is just going to be just beyond that. And essentially, if price moves to the upside, we have the entire full range of movement that we could potentially capture on the other side of the trade, right? So this is a nice low risk, high reward trade. And when price moves and it takes off in an unexpected way, right? Because just because we buy here doesn't mean that we're expecting this giant vertical move to the upside, right? We're expecting and hoping for a nice continuation of trend, right? We'd like to see all the levels tested, like to see a little bit of price moving around each one, like to see price digested and then move along, you know, a nice trend line like this, but not so much the price action, right? So I've drawn this trend line here. We've got this little pullback here. So you can move this a little bit closer to that. And then on certain moves like this, you may need to even bump down. Like this is a 5-minute chart. At this point, I would bump down to probably like a 2-minute chart just to be able to see things a little bit clearer. So depending on your time frame, if you're trading an hourly chart, you may need to bump down to like a 15-minute chart just to be able to see the price action a little bit better and how it interacts with the trend line if you choose to use that as a part of your momentum reversal identifier, right? So we see a really nice move to the upside, right? Which actually ends up being pretty much the high of the day, right? So if you were fortunate enough to set up your, to anticipate this and to set up your trade that way, again, depending on your range for the day here. So we start at 102, we end the day at 105. At 300 points of the day, if you were able to actually set yourself up and get that essentially picture perfect entry here, and you're able to capture things, we're going to take, again, the first profit off as price moves in our direction, right? And then it's a matter of setting up our next target, right? So at this point, it may be the value area high, right? Depending on whether or not we think that price could break out in a major way, or if it could, or if price could potentially stall there and roll over, right? Depends on how risk averse you are, or how hungry or how much you anticipate the market to move, right? And then as price breaks out beyond that, so you've got that, you can either look at that resistance level. We can come back over here and check out previous price resistance. So we've got this high, high of this move here, which is where part of that resistance happens. Let's just jog over here real quick. Okay, and so we see the high of this move end up being around 104.25, right? Essentially the bulk of this move, this one being closer to 104.50. Okay, so we can look to see where that plays out over here. Okay, so 104.25 is going to be in this area here. 104.50 is going to be about here, right? So those are also very viable price targets, right, for your second profit. Or you could just wait for a price to reverse the momentum that's happening here, right? But either way, if we're looking at taking off that second one, we want to be consistent with that approach, right? So whatever you choose, based on, you know, the range, support and resistance, and the momentum, you want to be consistent in as far as like how you are going to take that off, right? And so a lot of that's going to come down to your data tracking and your average move over time to go, okay, based on our experience and based on the data that we've collected, it makes sense for us to anticipate something that's close to, let's say, half of the daily range or a quarter of the daily range. Or we do really, really well with the momentum exit, but not so much at picking the correct support and resistance level type exits, or we're not consistent around that approach, or whatever you're going to be able to be most consistent with, and what your data tells you is the best move after tracking it over a certain period of time, long enough for the data set to become significant, then that's what you want to stick with, right? So we get the move higher here, breaks essentially all those resistance levels, breaks the previous high of the day, which again, the previous high of day, previous low of day, those are also can be significant support and resistance levels that are really good to identify, because a lot of times the market will interact with those levels. And so at that point, your literal day, if you got your entry here, your literal day could be done at that point. Or you could say, okay, we had this movement, now let's push it and let's see what else we can do. Or let's say you didn't even get an entry here, and this whole trade left the train station before you could get on board, and you said, okay, risk reward makes less and less sense here. I don't want to have, or you don't have a momentum strategy is not part of your, or a momentum setup is not part of your strategy. And so you say, okay, this is not my trade, so I'm going to have to wait for that deeper pullback to see what happens, right? So, since price breaks out so high and the momentum is going so fast and the move is so extreme and vertical, right? Really not on a ton of volume, considering, then what are we going to do? We're going to wait for that pullback, right? We're going to wait for that, the inevitable pullback that's going to happen. And so price starts to pull back, and just the way it goes up vertical, it also comes down vertical, right? We just don't know where that move is going to end. But we do know that if the move is significant, that the pullback is more than likely going to be significant as well, especially on extremely sharp and up moves, right? We're either going to have a sharp pullback, or like price is literally going to go sideways and then break out higher again, right? Kind of like how we saw from the top down, as far as the big move on the daily, TPO chart to the upside, sideways move, and then now we're heading higher, right? So we get to pull back to the value area high, price breaks through that, we move down to the former day's point of control, and then we end up stabilizing there, right? So in anticipation of this, right, since we don't know how far price is going to retrace at that point, we can see that price is essentially, so we got 101.82, 105.13, 102.55. This is essentially a 70% plus pullback of the prior move, right? Which is quite significant, and it's a lot, especially for this. This is the oil chart, so it's leverage. It's a very high leverage, right? So what we do see is the previous VWAP close and the point of control. So this actually has the most kind of confluence of support. So, but the safe thing here to do as well is, because the trend line is so steep, is honestly just waiting for the pullback to finish and for momentum to shift back to the upside, right? So there is nothing wrong with waiting for this pullback to finish. We have our trend line drawn, price breaks back up through the downtrend line, and even though the bottom of VWAP, or the value area high, is not an ideal entry, it is still low risk, because at that point you have waited for the selling to subside. You know that the sellers are no longer in immediate control, momentum is not to the downside anymore, and the buyers now have the edge and have the advantage. And so whether you got in here or you waited for, again, the breakout and then the pullback down here as another kind of indicator or cue that price is continuing to work itself to the upside and that the downside risk is essentially off the table for the moment. It's just a matter of how much the opportunity costs you, right? We talk about opportunity cost, trading information, right? Trading that information, waiting for price to come up here before we decide to enter back in. Potentially, you know, you could have potentially gotten a nice entry here. So if you bought here, then there was little entry difference in price here, but it doesn't always work out like that. But often when you wait for this move to happen, you may end up with something like this in a very, very limited opportunity environment, whereas if you would have taken a trigger or a cue off of just the momentum, it's going to get you in earlier than that will, right? So it's almost like 3 phases. If you decide to buy the pullback to the POC, you're going to get the best price point, but you also have limited knowledge or confirmation that price is going to hold that level, right? Just like if you decided to enter at the value area high thinking that price should hold and it didn't, you may take a loss on that. But if it stood here and bounced and it never came back, then you got the best price, right? So it's constantly a trade-off, right? So I find these counter trend reversals of the counter trend line to be often A, reliable, and B, to be pretty advantageous, right? Because you can also see here that we could have waited for a price to break that that counter trend line, but then we also get pullbacks after that, right? So if you were just patient and said, okay, confirmed that the momentum is reversed, and so now we just want to enter at a better price, right? We can see that this kind of like mini swing that happened here. Price pulls back to the middle of that move, right? These are great entries as well. Getting in on these little tails here underneath that value area high, again, expecting the breakout to the upside. And at this point, this trend line has not been drawn, right? Because we can't draw this trend line until the high has been broken, right? Until we get a new high on the move. But what we can see is, again, the move higher showing us that in good faith that the move is continuing to the upside, a really, really nice pullback to value, and then price continuing to show good favor in the move to the upside. And again, if you missed this area here, this is a perfectly legitimate area to establish a new trade, right? Because we've already seen the potential high of the range here. So if we entered at this point and we put our risk back down here or stop down in this area, we know that we're going to get that 2 or 3x multiplier on our potential reward if we come back up and we test the highs, which we ultimately did. So great place to enter for the first time, to re-enter after a nice move to the upside here. And we get some nice counter trend pullback triggers as well. All right, so that's that, and then we're going to move on to a swing trading example as well. All right, so let's run through our swing trade example, and once you guys see the power of this, it's actually really, really kind of exciting what the opportunities are that come out, right? Especially when we're talking about combining the value and the price action, and the way that we're able to anticipate and watch how the whole thing comes together, right? So let's take a look here. So we're on the daily chart here. We are looking at a market that's been in an uptrend, has pulled back in a major way through the primary trend support level, and has now broken the counter trend line on the daily chart. There was a pretty sharp move lower, so we're expecting price to move back up in our direction, at least for a little while, right? It's not guaranteed that we're going to go back to the highs and break out and the trend is all good, but we don't need to have that in order to make money on it, right? So at this point, you can see the full length of the move, but we can see where the price started and the momentum started to reverse in this area here. So at this point, this becomes something that was maybe on our watch list, and this is now getting close to a trigger point on the a trigger for our setup, for our swing trade setup. Right, and so it's often to combine even day trading and swing trading, or using the tactics of the day trading to get a killer entry on our swing trades, which helps maximize the profit for the trade, right? We get that tactical, really good entry on the day. That just sets us up for having that much more cushion as the trade continues to work out, right? So let's switch down to, switch over to the TPO and let's check that out. All right, so we can see here that as we saw, price momentum came down to the upside, right? Started to base down here, value slowly started moving higher. And then, so that's what we're looking at here, is we're looking at the trend line, the downtrend line coming through this area. And so now we want to look and see how price action reacts with the value area for the following day. And then hopefully that gets us into the trade, and then we can take that and we can manage the trade from there. So let's bump down to the 5-minute chart. And so that's what we see here. Let's take a look at the price action for the previous day as well too. So that gives us an idea of where we're at, right? So the day spent most of the time in value for the prior day, consolidated. So this is a giant 30-minute consolidation essentially through the entire day, and then it has broken out to the upside. Okay, so again, just add a little bit more context to exactly where we're at as we're opening here. So we're opening outside of value to the upside. And so what we'd like to see is, again, we'd like to see a pullback into the value area and then a rejection out. So that's exactly what we see here. So as the market opens this day, we are watching essentially where price came down here, tested the lows, and has traded all the way up through the value area. Okay, and so now that long trend line has been broken, right? We can expect that pullback to the downside as sellers become in control, and then price moves back down to, and it tests the, not only does it test the value of the previous day's value area high, but it also tests the previous day's VWAP close. And so we find that we get good support there, bounces, creates a new low, and is quickly rejected outside of our trend line here. Okay, so if we're doing a swing trade and we're looking for price reverse to the upside, right, then anything below, right, as long as this is fairly tight, we're looking at getting an entry, an ideal entry anywhere within this level here, because our stops are going to be on the other side of this, because we're expecting a multi-day move, right, in our favor. And then it's just a matter of where do we want to take profit at that point, right? Where do we want to bump up our stops? Where do we want to, and how do we want to assess and structure that trade, right? So we've talked about potentially trailing our stop with the previous day's VWAP close, with momentum, with, again, essentially once momentum has moved in our direction, once that momentum has reversed and we start to, price action starts to work against the point of control, right? So we're moving higher. So once point of control switches from being support to where it becomes resistance, right? So that's what we'll see here in a minute. So we can see price works in our favor. So let's say we did get an entry here because we were looking for that upside trade. So we're looking for a trend, we're looking for an entry in this area. Okay, so let's say that we got it, and now price has moved significantly in our favor to begin with. So again, even on our swing trades, we should still be taking advantage of momentum shifts, right? Because again, that's going to cover essentially our cost of our trade, right? So whereas before we would have been looking for, on our day trade, we have been looking for just a small movement in our direction in order to improve our average. At this point, you know, we could be looking for the first sharp move to the upside to take our first profit, right? So at this point, now we've taken our first profit, ends up being the high of the day, right? And so now, not only that, so now we've got money in the bank. Essentially, our risk is completely covered to the downside here. Our average is probably positive, right? So even if price came all the way back down and stopped us out, we'd still make money on the trade. And then B, we've got an extra bullet in our gun, right? We've got an extra potential entry available for us to take advantage of to get back in, right? So as we look at the 30-minute time frame, right? So this was essentially that move to the upside there, right? And price pulls back, and now we have this trend line drawn, right? Because we had these higher lows, and price broke out to the upside, and so now this becomes our support level, our new swing low for this trend line, right? So now we've got things are set up. Things are looking pretty sweet at this point, right? So we get a nice pullback on the day, but what we want to look for, right, is we want to look for another pullback deep into value where we know that entry is going to be low risk, right? So that's what we see here. So this is the day we were just looking at, right? So this is the following day. All right, so what we see is price closed here. Price opened up back in value, right? And this isn't a very impressive move in and of itself, but what it is it's still confirmation, right? Price didn't close outside of value to the downside. It closed upwards and away from value. Our entire value area is established completely above this value area. So even though it's not impressive, it's still enough for us to go, all right, we have conviction in the trade and we're holding on to it, right? So what we want to see, right, going forward is we're going to want to see any tests on the low side of the value, so that value area, low area, we're going to want to see that rejected back to the upside, okay? And so essentially a test of the value area low, because a movement significantly below that is going to be an exit trigger for us, right? Where we're going to abandon ship on the trade, right? We've got our long-term trend line. So maybe it's that trend line that we drew on the 30-minute chart, right? This one here, we say, okay, price starts working below that or breaks that level, we're out, right? Or a combination of price now working down below the value area low, and we come down here, we come back up and test it, we move lower, now we're out, right? It depends on how you want to structure the trade. So what we see is an immediate pullback down to the value area low, right? Price is pulled back into value, and then we get one more attempt to the downside, right? So this is where you have the tendency in the situation to get freaked out about the trade and to make a bad move, right? So let's look at the price action and see what that looked like. All right, so this is going to be the 26th now, and the 27th. Okay. So actually, let me double check the dates on here. Okay, this is the 26th. Okay, so it's a combination of the Sunday. Okay, yes. Okay, so that is the overnight. So it's the overnight move from Sunday night into Monday morning is what we're looking at right now. So let's tighten this up a little bit so we can see a little bit more. Okay. All right, so this is our breakdown here. Okay, so we're actually on the wrong day. No, we're not. Nope, this is still Sunday. Okay. All right, there we go. Sorry about that. All right. So now what we see is, and we'd have to adjust this, right? Because this moved higher. So let's take a look at this real quick. Our value area low at this point is 106.09. So just for visual example, 609 is going to be about here. Okay. So we see price move after Friday's close, right? This is where we took our first profit over here. Price is continuing to work through the day, but again, it's to the upside above the previous day's value. So things are looking good. Okay. So it comes down and it hits the value area low, right? We've got our POC is at 107.30. Let's see, 730 and 780. Okay. All right, comes down, is not able to gain traction below the value area low. All right, and then price is quickly abandoned and reversed to the upside here. Okay, so this is like almost like a little bit of a red flag saying, all right, we don't want price to continue along that. We can see that this whole entire move is happening overnight. It's very low volume. And so what we see is ultimately that move to the downside is rejected. Back to the upside, we break the largest counter trend line. This is going to be a trend line that's on the 30-minute chart as well, right? So we see that here. All right, and then price continues to move higher. So if we got another, so let's say we sold this one here, and now ideally we're going to buy another contract at the value area low, right? How sweet is this entry, right? This puts potentially a ton of money in our pocket again for the second time, right? So now we're just building off of that move. All right, so we get another nice move to the upside here. Price breaks this trend line. You take another profit, and now again you've reloaded your gun, right? Now you've pushed your profit of your trade even higher, right? Without ever having to move our stop. And that's one of the things too. Is we haven't even had to move our stop at that day or at that point in time, right? We're letting the price action lead everything that we're doing, and which is ultimately going to help us to just use the price action to help us make decisions with the trade and make more money, right? So again, we're back to just observing at this point. We see that prices essentially stayed within value. So this is one giant consolidation, right? If we go switch back over to the 30-minute chart right here, that's what we see here. Price, we're not seeing any traction to the upside yet, but what we're not seeing is price reverse back to the downside. Okay, so we're gonna go through this process, and then we repeat that process, right? So that's what we see here. We see prices consolidated, but the value area has moved higher. Our point of control has moved higher on the day. So technically that is value continuing to move to the upside, just not in a meaningful way. And then we get that significant move to the upside the next day. Again, value is not, even though the value area low was broken, the price was not able to create any new value areas or any significant price action to the downside before it was ultimately rejected higher on the day, and then continues to move up as value continues to move higher, right? And it only wasn't until here where price, essentially value was created lower for the first time, right? So again, when we're talking about taking profit on that, we're talking about this right here. We can tell that this trend line here was broken, which I believe is now this larger trend line here has now been broken. We can see that value is established up here at the high, and then it were reversed higher versus value being established lower and then rejected to the upside, right? And so we can see here, price moved higher, created value, and then decided that that value was not sustainable, and sellers took over control of the day. At that point, we spent a little time in the value area before ultimately breaking down, and then value was created. So now at this point, it closed on the low of the day, but we can see that price spent some time on the latter part of the day here building that value below the value area low. And at this point, in my opinion, the swing trade is dead, and we've taken awesome advantage of the moves in between here and there. And then again, we talked about taking profit. So there's multiple opportunities to take profit or to take entry at the value area low in anticipation of the price to move higher. taking advantage of the momentum to the upside. And then also, we had plenty of opportunity here, right, to take advantage of these moves of momentum. Right, collecting profit along the way and then potentially getting in on an advantageous pullback, but not fully exiting the trade until the main momentum and the value has reversed on it. So that was a pretty long and in-depth, detailed section on the profit taking, which is kind of where I wanted to go. I wanted to give multiple examples, and I wanted to break that down in a way that was meaningful and had a lot of depth to it. So I hope you got value out of there, and we will see you in the next section.